a short period of time. But now we're going to get to hear him for as long as he can hold out for the full hour for. Marty, it's over to you. You're on mute there.
Hi, I'm Marty. I'm an alcoholic. And I'm really happy to be here in this meeting. I love to hear people speak with a British or an Irish accent. Mostly I don't understand what you're talking about, but I do feel it's the accents that I can hear are very soft to me. I could just listen to you speak and just be with that. I don't even have to understand what you're saying, and I usually don't. But especially the Irish people, I don't understand it. The Scottish people, I don't understand. I don't understand one word, generally speaking. But which reminds me, does anybody know Margaret H. from Galway?
Yes.
Do you have her number?
Yes.
Could you just give her a call and tell her that I'd love to see her online? She's
Sure.
one of my favorite people that I've met since
Sure.
I've been doing these things. She's an AA hero to me. She's a magnificently heroic and intelligent and sober woman. Sober woman. In my eyes, there's nothing more beautiful than a sober woman. Yeah. So if you can get Margaret to just say hello, I'll be happy for at least for the rest of the day. So I am an alcoholic. The story that I tell is the same story every time because I can't make up another one, although I try. It's just the same. I was born addicted to heroin. And in those days, nobody knew about what an addicted infant was. There was no known treatment for grown-ups that were addicted when I was a baby. And certainly nobody ever thought that there would be a baby that was addicted. But I was. And since they didn't know how to treat it, my health was getting worse and worse. I was getting weaker and weaker. I was not able to take any food until they discovered a medicine that they could give me, and it worked immediately. It was a medicine based with opium and whatever else they were using at the time. And it cured me immediately. I stopped screaming. From what I understand, I was very annoying because I wouldn't sleep and I was making lots of noise, and I was very, very sick and all of that. But it seemed to be cured immediately upon giving me some dope. It worked right away, and dope always worked for me right away. And so I got better, and I was released from the hospital with a prescription for this medication that saved me. And so I was on this opiate medication for the first 3 years of my life. And it worked. It just worked. And at the end of 3 years, the doctor stopped reordering the medication. And so I started to detox again. And nobody knew what was going on. And so I just became an unruly little kid. And I was keeping my parents up. My parents couldn't stay loaded. I kept bringing them down. And my father, he discovered a medication that actually he could give me, which was um, warm milk and rye whiskey. And that actually fixed me up. That was like my favorite thing in the world. And uh, that we used that, they used that on me every time I became unruly or oppositional or disagreeable. They just gave me some warm milk and rye whiskey, and I immediately calmed down. And so that's what happened. Um, so there I was, uh, getting loaded 2 or 3 times a day, and uh, actually, when I was 5 years old, where I came from, we started school, and I had my medicine when I woke up and went to school, got some more medicine when I came home at lunchtime, and had more when I came home at 3 o'clock when we were dismissed from school, and a little bit more later on, and a little bit before I went to sleep. And that cured me. They thought I was cured. Uh, However, I was strung out on rye whiskey and milk. So I was loaded every single day, from what I understand, and uh, like it was normal for me to be drunk. It was the normal thing. So like I didn't feel unusually anything. I took my medicine and I felt normal. And uh, at 3 o'clock when I came home from school, I used to sit on the couch and my mother was sitting on the couch opposite me, and I'd watch her shoot dope. And the magic of heroin. I saw her do the ceremony, the heroin ceremony, how she cooked it and tied off her arm and shot it. And when she shot it, almost immediately, the deep lines on her face smoothed out, and she achieved a certain level of calm and peace that uh, that really impressed me. My mother was generally in bad shape, but after she shot dope, she became this magical, beautiful woman who was really my hero. And obviously, what I wanted to do was the same thing she did, but of course, I didn't know how. I mean, I didn't have any dope, but I watched her very carefully, and I went to my room like with a pen and sort of um, try to emulate her, and like, because in my mind, like, if I get a chance, I'm going to do it right. If I get a chance, I'm going to do it right. And I did get a chance. My parents left. My parents, my mother especially, never really left the house much. Uh, I was, uh, I was, I was the person who was relegated to. Uh, every once in a while, I was told to go around the corner and see the guy. They called him the guy. He was a very nice guy around the corner. I'd go and buzz his apartment, and he would answer uh, with a buzz, and I would get through the door and go up, I think, second floor or so upstairs, And he would answer the door and be very pleasant. And how are you? How's your mom? How's your dad? Everything okay? Oh, everything's just fine. And he would say, and he said, I'll be back in a minute. And he'd go into the other room. And a few minutes later, he'd come out with a little bag, little paper bag. And he said, give this to mom and send my regards to your parents. Bye. And I'd go home and I knew what was in there because I saw when she opened the bag what was in there. It was dope. So I was the connection between my mother and her real connection. Uh, so we did that until one day my parents decided to go out, leave the house. And that was my first time that I was free to try to do what my mother did. I knew where she kept her drugs and all of the stuff that she used to set it up. And I memorized the ceremony. I had it in my mind, and I went and got her drugs, uh, cooked it down just the way she did in her favorite little spoon. She was very proud of a little spoon that she had bent up. It was like, and she was proud of it because it was from Turkey. She said, this is a Turkish spoon. And I cooked up these drugs, and after some effort, I actually did it. And it was great. I never met a drug I didn't like. And it was just wonderful. And, so what do? You just keep doing it. Every day or so, I would just go into my mother's hideout and get the drugs and shoot a little drugs and a little bit more, whenever I felt like it. And I kept feeling like it a little bit more often until my parents pulled me aside and said, you can't do that anymore. And I couldn't understand why. And my father said, we can't afford it. You're using your mother's drugs and we can't afford it. And that was the first time I was aware of the fact that drugs cost money. The guy gave me a bag. It was like a friendship thing. He was my parents' friend. He gave them drugs. They were his friend. It was like giving somebody a cup of sugar, And I didn't understand that. And I told my father that I didn't believe him. That for some reason he didn't want me to feel good. And he said, no more of that. And so I had to sneak it. But how could I sneak it? There was a specific amount in the hideout. And if I used some of it, there was less than that specific amount. And so they kept warning me and warning me. And then at around 12 years old, they kicked me out of the house because they couldn't afford it. Or I don't know why they kicked me out of the house, but chances were I would have stayed if I wasn't using my mom's drugs. So there I was. I was out in the street in Brooklyn, New York, with a habit. With a habit, I was addicted to alcohol and to heroin. Excuse me. Somebody just sent me a message, and everybody that I know knows that I'm busy today. So I went to the guy with the paper bag. That was the only way I could get drugs, is go to him. And I did the same ceremony. I went around the corner, pushed the button, and he buzzed me downstairs. I went upstairs and He opened the door and he said, "How are you? How are your parents? How are they doing?" And I said, "I don't know because I don't live there anymore." I said, "What do you mean?" "Well, they kicked me out." "And so what do you want here?" he said. I said, "Well, I want you to give me what you gave my mother." And he said, wait, you don't live there, and what are you going to do with with what I give you?" I said, "Well, I know what it is, and I want to use it because that's what I do." And he just had difficulty believing that a 12-year-old kid was shooting dope. So he said, "Come on." And I said, "I'll show you." So he said, "Yeah, you show me." So he gave me the ability to cook down some heroin, and he had all the fixings. Anybody that's shot heroin know that you need cotton and water and all that stuff. And I knew how to do it. And at the first try, I actually used the dope dealer's heroin, and he was amazed. He was absolutely, "Look what this kid did. He's amazing." So I was the dope dealer's mascot for about 1.5 days. And then I was starting to cost him money because he was showing all his friends what this kid could do. But meanwhile, what I could do cost him a lot of money. And so he said, "Well, I can't give you the drugs anymore. You have to pay for them." And uh, uh, finally, I found out that my father wasn't lying. The drugs cost money. And um, I didn't know what to do. I had no place to live and certainly no money. And my secret, which was my secret my entire life, was that I never stopped going to school. Even when I was shooting dope every day, even definitely when I was drinking every day, I never missed school because I equated going to school with making money. So if I went to school because I didn't want to be poor anymore. So through my entire life, uh, I went to school. Actually, the last time I was in school was 2 years ago. And I've been in school all of that time up until 2 years ago because there was this need to do more and more and more. And the dealer's friends told me how to get money, and it seemed easy to do. They pointed out, they told me how to stand at twilight and look up at the tenement buildings, and the lower floors that didn't have their lights on meant that there was nobody home. And so they told me if I can climb into their window, I could take out things that they would buy from me. And with that money, I could have my and uh, food and drug money and alcohol. All of my needs were taken care of. And I found, like, we lived in a slum in New York, in Brooklyn, New York. And in that slum, there were buildings that were these big tenement buildings that were just burned out. Nobody lived there. And I found a cellar in one of those buildings that I could just live in there. Uh, and I, I'd be able to have a safe place to sleep and that kind of thing. So that was the deal. I got my money at sundown, no, right around sundown every night, because they would be waiting for me to come back with things that I stole, and they gave me money for it. And that's how I paid my way. And that was it. From 12 years old on, there were many, many adventures. There was tremendous adventures that it's just part of a drunkalogue. Like I stole money. I uh, I got involved, I got in trouble with the police. I was sent to um, um, a major prison for 6 months for beating up a cop and stealing his money because I didn't know he was a cop. And in those days, back then, there was no computers, so um, they captured me and brought me to a place in Ossining, New York, a maximum security prison, and the name of it is Sing Sing Correctional Facility. And they doctored the records so that I was vaguely described in those records. And the original guy escaped on his way to this prison. So they just had to change the descriptions, and it was me. In those days, without a computer, it's really easy to do. You use that, what do you call it, whiteout or something like that. You just paint it on the thing and just type over it. And that's what it was. I was there. And so I had all of those, all of those sad things that, quite frankly, it didn't make me as sad as it sounds. It was just the way I lived. And I didn't know any other way. It seemed like I was suffering a whole lot less than my parents suffered, because I was young and strong and didn't know there was another way. And so I did that from 12 years on. I did that, lived in burned out buildings. Sometimes the buildings were not available. I was just remembering yesterday that I spent time in the wintertime sleeping on the grating above the subways in New York because heat came up. And that's where I sleep. And it, if I was an adult that knew what living was, it would have really bothered me. But it was just my way, my living, just the way I live. And all that I'm saying is the story sounds a lot more sad than I was feeling, because I was doing well in school, which was my goal, just to do well in school. The rest of this stuff didn't matter. And I was getting loaded. However, I couldn't keep up with my drug needs. And because I couldn't keep up with because I was getting weaker and weaker and weaker, climbing up in those buildings, sometimes getting caught, but usually not, but getting caught enough times to have bruises and sprains and maybe some minor breaks in my body that I don't know what happened to them. And so I was getting weaker and weaker. I can get only less food, less drugs, until one day, when I was 17 years old, in the evening, I woke up, I came to between two giant piles of snow. And it was cold. It was in February. February in Brooklyn is a cold day. It's always a cold day in February in Brooklyn, New York. And I came to facing the curbstone, and I pushed myself up and looked over the curbstone, and I smelled coffee. Amazing. I smelled coffee in the evening on a cold winter day. And I was cold, I was hungry. And if I was hungry, that means I didn't have drugs for a long time because I would get loaded before I ate. And I pushed myself up and followed my nose. I followed the aroma of coffee, and I walked until I saw this storefront, this empty store with foggy windows. And this is where the coffee was coming from. So I just walked in. I walked in, and there were 5 or 6 guys sitting around a table. And on this side, against this wall, on the left side, there was a big aluminum coffee pot, giant coffee pot. And next to that, here was a pot. To the left of the pot, I mean, it wasn't a pot; it was a percolator. I don't know if you have them in Europe. It's one of these things. Water goes up and down through a spout, and coffee gets made. And next to the coffee pot or the percolator, were these long rows of donuts, chock full of nuts, sugar donuts. There was this company that actually made coffee and donuts, and they stopped making these sugar donuts years ago, and I really wish they didn't. They were the most delicious things. They were soft on the inside and crispy on the outside, covered with powdered sugar, and they were just incredibly good. And so I ate donuts and drank coffee. I just did that without a care in the world, without a care in the world, just drinking coffee and eating donuts, drinking coffee and eating donuts, until I felt one of those things. And I turned around. Oh, by the way, how long, when do I have to stop? Anybody know?
20 minutes, man. You still got 20 minutes.
Oh, sure. I turned around and saw this guy that looked like a scarecrow. He was tall and skinny. He was wearing black pants that weren't really black. They were just something else, with a black jacket that didn't match the black pants. He had a flannel shirt on with a print tie, with brown shoes and white socks. That's what I was looking at. And there was a tall, skinny guy with his hair plastered down like that and sticking up in the back just like that. And he looked at me and said, "Are you an alcoholic?" And I said, "Well, my parents drove me. We live in New Jersey. And my parents, we just came to New York to see what it was like." And okay, we got out of the car and I just lost my parents. So if you give me $5, I will take the subway under the Hudson River to New Jersey and go directly to my father's house, who will drive me immediately back here and give you $10. So it's just a matter of time. You give me $5, and as long as it takes for me to get from here to New Jersey and driven back, you will have $10 where there used to be 5. What do you think? And he said, "Are you a drug addict?" And I said, "Well, I don't, I could tell you that if you give me $5, I'll be able to get you 10. And he said to me, "We're almost done here. Why don't you wait until we finish? And if you have the time, we can go up to my apartment, which is on the 3rd floor, and we'll talk about it. Okay. I mean, I mean, it's easier to hustle a guy if it's just you and him alone in a room. It's great. Okay, I can do that. So I was ready to go upstairs and hustle him out of more than $5. And we went upstairs after he said it was done. By the way, that was an AA meeting that I walked into. Surprise, surprise. Uh, uh, but we went up to his apartment 2 flights up. His name was Robert Johnson. Uh, Great sober man. And he said, well, you sit down on the bed and I'm going to go into the kitchen and make tea for us and we'll talk all about what you want to talk about. And so he went into this was like a giant room that was sort of separated into a few rooms. And he went into a room that was into a separation that looked like a little kitchen. And I sat down on the bed and I could remember the sound of the steam heat coming up. And I was feeling really warm. And I fell back on the bed. And Mr. Johnson told me that he had to lay on my chest off and on for a month because he was afraid I was going to either fall off the bed or jump out the window because I was kicking so hard. The detox was a hard detox. And when I was able to see, because the drugs were mixed up, I don't know what they put in there, but my vision was bad, and I couldn't understand things. But when my vision came back, he would ask me to read with him from this book. Turns out to be it was a big book. And then after we read for a while, we go downstairs for our noon meeting. Actually, no, the morning meeting. First is the morning meeting. Then we came up, had lunch, went to our afternoon meeting after reading the book again. And then we come up, we'd stay downstairs after the meeting and sweep up the meeting room, clean out the ashtrays, and then come back upstairs and have a rest. We'd take a nap and then get up and take a look at the big book again and go to the evening meeting and then come back. And that was how we did our days. He told me that in the very beginning that I could stay with him for a year if I wanted to. And if we got, if we got along, we could stay for a year. If we couldn't get along, I'd have to leave. And this guy was like, he was like my savior. He gave me food. Oh, and the only thing that I really had to commit to is to never be out of his sight for the year. No matter where I was, it has to be within his sight, or else I'd have to leave. So that was the only limit. And that was easy to get free food and a warm, dry place to live. Boy, I didn't have a warm, dry place to live since I was 12 years old. So I was really grateful for that. And I lived with Mr. Johnson. And our days were just like that. Days were just like that. We just did that every day. I had no idea what those meetings were about, by the way. The big book sounded like a bunch of bullshit to me, but people were complaining and saying sad things. But I had a warm, dry place to live and food to eat mostly every day. There were times that we had to skimp a little bit. But we did okay. And then one day, Mr. Johnson came up and said, you know, the year is up. You could stay as long as you want. And the most important thing is I'm going out for a walk, because he hadn't been alone for a year. So this is what it looked like. We lived here. Mr. Johnson came out of the house and went this way. I, as soon as he left, knew where he kept his rent money, and I went, got his rent money, put it in my pocket, and came down here and went this way. I went around the corner this way, and Mr. Johnson went around the corner that way. And when I turned the corner, I saw this scarecrow walking toward me, and I had his rent in my pocket. And as we started to walk toward each other, Mr. Johnson stopped looking like a skinny scarecrow. He looked like he was gaining muscle in my mind. And I knew that he was going to do things to me like adults always did in those days, the young kids who screw up. He was going to beat me up and maybe kill me. So we walked closer and closer and closer. And I remember him getting close to me and closer and closer. And as he got closer, I was starting to lean back. And finally, he put his hand on my shoulder and said, "Don't be stupid, boy. Let's go home." And something happened in my mind. It started to, something made sense to me, but I wasn't quite sure it was. But I knew it had something to do with the meetings that we went to every day. It had something to do about relationships and alcoholism, which of course I didn't even have any idea what that meant. But I hadn't had a drink for a year. And after detoxing, I rarely even thought about it because I was with Mr. Johnson every second of the day. And every day we got closer. I felt closer to him. And when I knew he was going to actually throw me out and beat me up, he said, "Let's go home." And I knew it had something to be about Alcoholics Anonymous, and had something to do with the steps that everybody spoke about in the meetings we went to. Anybody that visited Mr. Johnson would talk about steps. And everybody was saying, oh, it was the steps that saved their life and opened up their mind and opened up their heart, which of course I thought was totally bullshit. However, it wasn't bullshit because this guy didn't hit me. He didn't beat me up. He didn't throw me out. He said, "Let's go home." And so that day, I asked Mr. Johnson if he would teach me the steps. And he said something like, "Oh, okay, if you want it." And that day we worked the first 3 steps. We went home and worked the first 3 steps. And that was the beginning. Then I started to see the people that came there every day were learning from each other and learning from this big book, which wasn't that big, it was just a book, but it was the big book. And everybody was talking about their experience with alcohol. They looked at me a little weird because I spoke about drugs, but I didn't really speak that much. Mr. Johnson never spoke that much, and he was an example to me. Like I go to these big meetings and tell my story, but usually I don't even speak at meetings in the meetings that I go to. Not much. I just go to listen. Mr. Johnson taught me that listening is the sober way. The best position of my mouth should be closed. And when it comes to words, less is more. Those are his words. He said that over and over to not just me, but everybody that asked him questions. And so it's unusual for me to be speaking to all of you people that I would probably be just sitting back and listening to. But I'm still sober. I lived with Mr. Johnson until he died. And I'm still a member of AA. That's it.
Thank you.
Wow.
Let me just stop